What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing true crime time, the smiley face killer theory, and it's somewhat of a part 2 from last week. As many of you know, if you've been watching me for at least the last year, I have an extremely loud air conditioner, so I did need to keep that running today. So the little bit of background noise, that's exactly what that is. If you didn't watch last week's video, you might want to go back and do that, although you really don't have to watch that one first. This is a continuation of those cases though, and I think you should probably at least check that one out after this one, so you have a more well-rounded view and understanding of what we're discussing here today. I mentioned several times last week that I'm skeptical about the smiley face aspect of this theory, but otherwise, I do believe there's something very strange, sinister, and even diabolical going on in this country. And though we haven't heard much about it in some time, please believe it is still going on. I've actually been looking for more recent cases, and as soon as I compile a list of the most recent cases that I can get together, I'm going to bring you a part 3 of this. But I'm fairly certain that since so much attention was given to this, they've been suppressing it for the past few years, which in my opinion is why we haven't heard a lot about it. So for now, let's jump right into the smiley face killer theory. I first want to credit Missing Persons and Mysteries because a lot of the information I'm presenting to you all today comes directly from the script I wrote for them about this subject, and Bill, the creator over there, was nice enough to allow me to use what he paid me to write for his channel over here on my channel. Just wanted to make that acknowledgement real quick that if you watch both channels, you may see some similar stuff in here, but facts are facts and facts don't change. And because I did all of the research and wrote the entire almost 12,000 word script over at the SFK documentary on that channel, Bill had no issues with me reusing it over here, so more and more people can hear about it and so that we can keep the stories getting out there. Obviously, I changed it up a lot to make it fit my channel. With all of that being said, let's get into it. With so many cases of young men going out to bars and or parties with groups of friends and ending up disappearing for weeks or even months, only to be found in random nearby water sources, deceased under very strange circumstances, there was bound to at some point be a theory about it that popped up. This would be what we have come to know as the smiley face killer theory. The connection in these cases were discovered and parameters for such cases were set, put together, and advanced by retired New York detectives Kevin Gannon, Anthony Duarte, and Dr. Lee Gilbertson. Gilbertson is a criminal justice professor and gang expert at St. Cloud State University. The theory alleges that a number of young men found dead in seemingly random bodies of water across the United States, with specific attention being focused on the Midwestern states between the early 1990s and 2010s, did not in fact drown, but were victims of foul play. Law enforcement agencies across the country are denying there's any sort of connection, usually with the coroner signing off on the typical possibly got too drunk, wandered off into a water source, and most likely drowned due to intoxication cause of death. However, these two detectives theorized that these specific drownings, with several very specific parameters which we will discuss in this script, in this video, are all connected somehow. They believe all of them to be the work of a serial killer or killers who reportedly leave a smiley face in some type of graffiti near the sites where these boys are said by law enforcement to have accidentally drowned. How many times could there be such a situation near the water where a young man, after a night of innocent partying and fun, was separated from his group and never seen again until his body was recovered, before we all agree it can't be a coincidence anymore? It just can't be. Let's look further into it now, and at the end, you tell me what you think. Is it possible that a group of human beings could be so skilled as to never leave any trace of their existence behind during an alleged span of more than 20 years? Not one single shred of evidence of foul play. Well, not quite. I don't believe it's a human issue. We may talk more about that later, but let me know what you think in the comments, please. Let's start off with the case of Dakota James. On January 25th, 2017, at around 11:30 p.m., 23-year-old Duquesne graduate Dakota James was walking back to his apartment after a night out partying with a group of friends and coworkers. The last known sighting of him was a surveillance camera in the downtown area that picked him up walking in the direction of his home. He's seen in the footage walking into a dark alley, and he was never seen alive again. When James didn't show up for work the following morning, his boss was concerned enough to call his family, who in turn notified the police and reported him as missing. They unfortunately were falsely told they had to wait 72 hours to formally report him as missing. When nothing seemed to be getting accomplished by the local police, the family hired a private investigator who organized a massive search of the local downtown area where Dakota was last known to be seen on that video footage. This search is what led to the discovery of his body in the Ohio River 40 days after he was last known to be alive, after he was last seen alive on that footage. The Pittsburgh police concluded that he had been crossing a bridge and accidentally, due to his drunken state, fell into the river and drowned. Before its discovery, however, the police determined that the body had most likely traveled almost 10 miles and even had to squeeze through a dam before eventually ending up where it was found. This would be all well and good, right? Except for the fact that the body had almost no visible damage on it. How could it be so pristine after having traveled almost 10 miles in the heavily trafficked river? Since the case has since been closed and labeled a drowning, we may never actually get those answers. Also, no tests were performed to discover if there was any GHB in his system or not. A smiley face was found spray painted on a nearby underpass. Keep in mind that on the last bit of footage of Dakota as he entered the alley, he was looking down at his cell phone. This is another common occurrence in these strange disappearances. Either the victim makes a shady and bizarre final phone call or is seen looking down at their phone in the last known moments of their life. Dakota's parents said that there is no way possible he could have drowned because he was a star athlete and the school's swim captain. They also said their son was an, quote, inexperienced drinker, end quote, and there's no way he would have allowed himself to become so inebriated as to accidentally fall into a river and then to not be able to get himself out. 6 years later, and there is absolutely no new information in Dakota's case. It's still closed and ruled an accidental drowning, and his parents still have no answers to their many questions. Mainly, could this have been a work of the smiley face killer or killers? Or for that matter, any killer? Was there foul play? They still don't know. On January 19th, 2018, in Woodland, Pennsylvania, 24-year-old Tommy Booth was out celebrating his 21st birthday, bar hopping with his friends. This is yet another case which displays one or several of the parameters known to be from a smiley face killing. Tommy Booth was captured on the bar's surveillance footage entering the bar, but there was no evidence of him ever having left. This is far more common than you might think and is one of the main things which people who subscribe to this theory think is an extremely strange thing and cannot easily be explained away. How does someone get captured on surveillance video entering a place but never exiting, only to be found later on deceased somewhere in a seemingly random nearby water source? Many people take this evidence, or lack thereof, alone as a reason to point to a group of killers or possibly an individual being responsible for these seemingly accidental deaths. Too much about all of it just doesn't make sense. Tommy Booth was found face down in a creek right behind the bar 2 weeks after he had gone missing. There were no signs of trauma on his body, and it was ruled a, quote, probable drowning, end quote. This is another way in which it seems the authorities involved in these cases try to play fast and loose with their wording in the autopsy reports. What exactly does probable drowning actually mean? It means the coroner isn't sure what actually happened and thinks it might be, maybe, that these young men are drowning. Tommy Booth's autopsy isn't the only one to have this determination of death, and it's downright confusing. How are these cases, both Booth's and those similar with the same death determination, being closed if the autopsy doesn't have an exact cause of death? This is where the human element comes into play. Whether you're discussing the inability for the coroner to determine an exact cause of death, or wondering how a person, even a group of people, could possibly continuously pull off these seemingly perfect yet completely confusing deaths without leaving behind any evidence at all or ever being caught. In fact, these smiley face killers must be so adept at their work that most people don't even believe they exist, and most investigators won't acknowledge that they just might exist. Another very strange thing about Thomas Booth's case is not only his body having no signs of any kind of trauma to it, but the place where his body was discovered. It had been searched several times in the 2 weeks before he was found there, and apparently nobody even noticed it. He was right out in the open though, so many people think that for him to have been found there says it all. There must have been some kind of foul play because he obviously was not there the entire time. He wasn't there for the entire 2 weeks, so where was he? Groups of searchers had gone back and forth down the creek for weeks and found nothing. This is yet another parameter we must look for when investigating these types of cases. According to information released in the book Case Studies in Drowning Forensics, written by Kevin Gannon and Dr. Lee Gilbertson, Booth's body was in full rigor mortis. This is important because he was missing for 2 weeks and found in an area which had been repeatedly searched, again like so many others in these cases, and full rigor almost always dissipates within 24 to 36 hours. This was just more proof to his friends, loved ones, and even the volunteers who searched for him that foul play was definitely afoot. This would be a very reasonable explanation as to why his body just seemed to randomly appear one day. He couldn't possibly have been there the whole 2 weeks he was missing, and in fact had only been deceased for 24 to 36 hours. So, where was he for the rest of that time? This is another question commonly asked when reviewing the possible victims of the smiley face killer's autopsies. Many, and I mean many, of these young men were found in places which were already searched, and also they hadn't been deceased nearly as long as they had been missing. However, law enforcement across multiple states and counties have given over to just ignoring this one little fact and pretending as though it's somehow possible for all of this to be happening. Acting as if makes perfect sense in the hopes they do not have a group of killers on their hands who have been operating at a perfect success rate right under their noses for over 20 years now. Kevin Gannon and Lee Gilbertson also opined that the body had been staged. There seemed to be 3 sticks strategically placed around the body, and there were shoe and drag marks in the soil. A smiley face was found painted under the deck of the bar on a wall very nearby the body. These are just a few of the many cases where, in the opinion of most civilians familiar with what happened, the authorities should have had some very serious questions. Each case has at least one thing, very blatant, which stands out as not right or off. How is it that police and investigators aren't seeing these things that are so obvious to everyone else? How is it the medical examiners aren't asking the very same questions, such as, whose hair was that clutched in his hand, when we talk about one of the cases from last week? And how did these sticks get here placed like this? And also, how on earth did he drag his own dead body? These unanswered questions and so many more are what continue to fuel this particular theory. Is there something going on out there which the government, local authorities, and even the media are trying to keep from the public? Sure seems that way to many of the families of the victims too. I mean, most of them are on board with something being amiss. Whether they believe in the smiley face killer theory or not, they definitely believe foul play was involved. None of it makes any sense. Take the tragic case of Todd Geib for yet another example of a tragic death which, no matter how you look at it, doesn't quite add up. Todd Geib was just another bright young man out having some fun at a bonfire party with some friends on the night of June 12th, 2005. The party was very close to the 22-year-old's house in Casnovia, Michigan. The bonfire took place in the early morning hours, and Todd was reported as missing later on that same day. On the night of his disappearance, he made several phone calls to numerous different friends, but only one actually answered. This friend stated that when he answered, he heard Todd say, "I'm in a field," before the call ended. To this day, no one's sure if Todd ended the call, if his phone died, if he lost service, or if something completely unknown and possibly sinister happened. What we do know is that this is the last call Todd's phone would ever make, and it would go straight to voicemail from then on. His body was found 3 weeks later. Surprisingly, it was found in a lake, which was near the bonfire he had been last seen at, that had already been searched more than once. As if this weren't strange enough, the position of Todd's body definitely raised some eyebrows. His body was found with the head and shoulders sticking out of the water. He was just bobbing there as if he had jumped in to take a quick swim and had just been standing there. If the searchers hadn't known better, that's exactly what it would have looked like, as though Todd were simply waiting in the lake. Todd's body also had very little signs of decomposition. His body's decomp was that of how it should have been the first day he went missing, which was 22 days earlier. So this all once again begs the question, where was Todd for the other 21 days? 3 weeks. Where was he? He definitely was not in the water for 22 days. And the way that we know that is because of the breaking down of his body and the decomposition. His body's decomp was that of how it should have been the day he went missing, as I said, and that was 22 days earlier. Nobody seems to be asking these questions besides the family. The authorities closed this case as another accidental drowning and chalked it up to Todd having had too much to drink and accidentally wandering into the lake. Todd would have been able to easily stand in the spot of the lake where he was found too. Why didn't he just walk out of the lake and save himself? While alcohol and antidepressants were found in Todd's bloodstream, neither were to the level of incapacitation they would have taken for him to not be able to walk or walk himself out of the lake. They were hardly even at the level to be considered that he was intoxicated at all. So why didn't he save himself? Where did the antidepressants come from? They weren't prescribed to Todd, as he was not clinically known to be suffering from any form of depression at the time he ended up in the lake. A smiley face was painted on a tree near the spot in the lake where he was found, and later on, a smiley face sticker was placed on his grave as well. Nobody ever found out who put it there. Depending on who you ask, some will say the smiley face killer or killers have taken the lives of more than 40 young college men with tons of potential throughout the course of 2 decades. These were star athletes, those with above average intelligence, many with a Germanic heritage. If you ask others, though, some may tell you there is no killer and there's something else going on entirely. Here is the case for there being a killer responsible for all of these accidental drownings. After all, how much can we chalk up to coincidences without our gut telling us something just isn't right? Plus, as you guys know, if you know me, I don't believe in coincidence at all. So, between 1997 and 2008, authorities across 11 states and in more than 25 cities removed the bodies of more than 40 white, young, talented, extremely intelligent men from local lakes, rivers, and other bodies of water. Being pulled dead under very suspicious circumstances out of bodies of water they had no business or reason to be anywhere near. And let's not forget Jelani from last week. I believe, as far as I can tell, he's the one and only African American, which is why most of the time he's not grouped in with these cases. But I do believe he should be grouped in with these cases. In fact, in most cases, the young men who ended up in these watery graves would have had to gone so far out of their way to reach these water sources when considering where they had last been seen or where it's last said that they were going to. Almost all of them had been last seen either leaving or, in a few cases, still in bars or clubs in what looked to be some sort of inebriated or extremely intoxicated state. As we've seen already, though, and I'm sure it will come up again, many of them weren't actually even drinking that much, and almost none of them did any kind of drugs either, despite one drug which keeps coming up over and over and over again, and I'm sure will come up more upon more thorough and informed investigations, and that's GHB. And I explained in depth what GHB is last week. I'll try to remember to leave the link card for last week's video up there. If not, you'll find it in the description box. Unfortunately, the authorities responsible for investigating these tragic deaths have time and time again concluded that, in their alleged inebriated and drunken states, these men had somehow accidentally fallen or ended up in the water. However, as you will come to see if you haven't already, they don't seem to be taking into account all of the other evidence, all of the evidence, and merely putting only surface effort into closing the cases rather than finding out what really happened. They want it off the radar. They don't want it out there. No, that case is closed. He drowned. Next. Don't look at anything over here. Nothing over here to see. Even more tragically, this leaves the victims' families to have to investigate the horrible deaths of their sons, brothers, nephews, uncles, and even in some cases, their fathers themselves. This is all the more tragic and all the more reason we need to start paying attention and putting it all together. Having it so all of the evidence is included in an investigation, as it should be. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime soon, guys. In the cases which have already been closed and deemed accidental, the police and investigators involved, despite compelling new evidence in many of those cases, are unwilling or unable to come forward and admit a mistake was made. Many mistakes were made. Therefore, are these families really receiving justice? 22 out of these 40 cases have had some form of smiley face symbol very near to where the body was found. Is that a coincidence? I don't know. You be the judge of that. Detective turned private investigator Kevin Gannon and his partner Anthony Duarte don't think so and have set out on a mission to help these loved ones find some real answers. So what's their take on the whole thing? The smiley face killers. They hypothesize that there is a group of serial killers abducting these young men after drugging them and somehow getting them to leave their group of friends behind, usually without them even saying anything to the friends. Most of the time, it seems like these young men just get very inebriated very quickly and wander off either accidentally because they don't know any better at that point, or possibly they're being lured away. Again, I refer you to Jelani. He gets a phone call 3 to 5 minutes after being at his friend's house, and then he randomly runs out the door, and the next time anyone sees him, he's deceased. No explanation. Nobody knows who called him. One of the investigators even commented about the alleged group of killers. Quote, "They're psychopaths. They have no remorse." End quote. Again, guys, and I just want to reiterate this, I don't believe at this point now in 2023 that we're dealing with a group of, or several groups of killers, of human killers. There was this theory that the smiley face killers somehow operated on the dark web and that that's how they were sending messages back and forth to one another, but it just wouldn't be possible to have a 100% perfect rate where no evidence was ever found. There was the case of Chris Jenkins, who we discussed last week, who did have that hair clutched in the death grip of his hand that his parents and the people closest to him insisted wasn't his. They did reopen that case, but there's been nothing new that came out. So I think even with the fact that they're put in water doesn't, contrary to popular belief, water does not get rid of every single shred of evidence. Something would have been left behind. This is going on as far back as 1997 or 1998, and probably even further. Now, I'm looking into more recent cases that haven't really been reported on yet, or that at least I haven't seen. But I'm also going to be looking further back than that because I want to try to get to the bottom of when this all really started happening. Guys, I think this is something inhuman. And again, I don't want to talk too much about that when I'm also discussing actual cases with the people's names in the video, because I know not everyone believes in the paranormal, and some people consider it to be very disrespectful to try to put that spin on their loved one's death with their name attached to it. But I would like to do a separate video where I speak in general about how this could be an inhuman thing. I don't know how that would work or what that's going to look like, but I am considering it as I continue my investigation into finding more cases, recent ones. So from 2021 to 2023, maybe even 2018 to 2023, and beyond, further back than 1997. So the case that's the basis for most of this theory and what kind of started it all is the tragic death of Patrick McNeil. Patrick McNeil was a 21-year-old Fordham University student in New York when he went missing on February 16, 1997. On this night, Patrick was last seen leaving a bar called the Dapper Dog, which is located in the Upper East Side of Manhattan. At this point in time, the world had never heard of the smiley face killer or killers or the theory, and this seems to be the first documented case. But as I said, I have a sneaking suspicion it goes a little further back, but we don't know. And a lot of people also point to, when did the internet start really gaining traction and more people started using it in their homes? Right around in 1997 when all of this started happening. There are many conflicting reports about Patrick and what happened the last night he was seen alive. It starts with some witnesses stating he was highly intoxicated and others saying he barely had anything to drink. Frustrating, I know, but the inconsistencies don't stop there. It should be mentioned here that by the time Patrick and his college buddies decided the Dapper Dog was going to be their main hangout spot, this place already had numerous citations. Not only for serving customers who were visibly intoxicated and should probably have been cut off, but also for serving to underage drinkers. So, not a very reputable establishment in the opinion of most to begin with. And I will say, as a former bartender, you can get in a lot of, if somebody leaves the bar and you were serving them when you had knowledge and they looked obviously inebriated or intoxicated and you let them leave, at least in New Jersey, you are going to be charged with some form of homicide or manslaughter or something. So New York, I don't imagine it being much different. It's only a state away. One of Patrick's roommates, who it should be mentioned did not like Patrick not one little bit, was the master of ceremonies on this particular night. Patrick wanted to show up despite the rift between him and this other kid to try and ease the tension and possibly make peace by showing his support as a possible friend and a roommate to this guy. He didn't want the drama and thought the guy might even give him a break if he showed up and showed some support. It's also said that the main reason Patrick actually showed up wasn't because he cared at all about his roommate who didn't even like him, but because he was in charge of booking entertainment acts for the university and was there for that reason. Again, this is just a little bit of the conflicting information which has never really been sorted through. Why was he even there in the first place? Should be simple enough to figure out. Patrick had 6 roommates at Fordham on campus, and including him, there were 7 young men in one house. One of these young men, the aforementioned master of ceremonies, confessed publicly both to his face and talked about it behind Patrick's back that he disliked him because he was a, quote, womanizer, end quote. This other student also alleged that he disliked Patrick because he was, quote, always preening and cared too much about academic status, end quote. Patrick McNeil was 6 feet tall and 195 pounds and was known for being both attractive and studious. He took how he looked very seriously. He took care of himself and he worked out regularly. When Patrick said goodbye to his friends and roommates that fateful night, he informed them he was going to hit the subway and take the train back to the Bronx campus. Some witnesses say Patrick was just standing out in front of the bar. Allegedly, he stated he was waiting for a female friend to come and take the subway with him. However, whether that's exactly what he was doing, loitering in the front of the bar for a while or not, a female never turned up, and after a while, Patrick was back on his way again, trying to get back to campus and call it a night by himself. As Patrick made his way south from the bar, several passerby described his state as falling over and stumbling. He allegedly even fell to the ground several times, enough that some of the motorists passing by stopped and offered to help him. He refused the help each time and kept stumbling forward on his way. This sounds like perhaps he was drugged. Maybe. Those witnesses who allegedly saw him that night in this drunken state also reported something else, something very eerie and interesting, given how this whole situation ended up. There are more than several witnesses who came forward and stated that they had observed a vehicle following Patrick from the time he walked out of the Dapper Dog until he turned the corner at 90th Street and seemingly vanished into thin air. Apparently, this vehicle was so suspicious, one of the other drivers on the road who had observed what was going on had the mind to write down a partial plate for that vehicle that was in question. When Patrick made the left onto 90th Street, he was never seen again. It's reported this vehicle made the left as well. We must keep in mind here that in 1997, surveillance everywhere was just in its infancy, and it wasn't everywhere you turned, every point you looked, like in our way overly, in my opinion, surveilled society we live in today. It's worth mentioning that the vehicle was never found or seen again either, despite the partial plate. Even with having the partial license plate and reporting it to the police, despite several witnesses coming forward about the same suspicious vehicle and the possible intent of the driver, the car, the driver were never found. This is like Bizarro World to me. I'm flabbergasted. Patrick was found on April 7th, approximately 12 miles from where he was last seen, and he was only wearing his jeans and his socks. Multiple detectives and police officers, along with some staff and the owners of the Dapper Dog, allegedly made some pretty aggressively judgmental statements about Patrick. These derogatory statements were made to the public and also to Patrick's family. That pisses me off. Insistence from authorities that he was, quote, running away from the females he impregnated, end quote. They also stated things like, quote, he didn't want to be in college and is somewhere being free of his responsibilities, end quote, and downright accusing him of being a drug user, specifically the big H that you inject. It's never been substantiated that Patrick did any sort of illicit drugs, let alone that one. He was not known at all for running from his problems, and in fact was someone who faced them. If you look at him possibly being there for a roommate who absolutely despised him, just to show support and try to back the guy up to cause or keep the peace, right? Why would he do that if he ran away from his problems? That's just one instance right there that I can think of, and I don't even know him or his family. And he hadn't ever gotten even one female pregnant, let alone a whole harem of them that he would have to run away from to avoid paying child support. There were also no plans of him not finishing school. In fact, he was right on track to achieving his ultimate goal, which was working for the FBI. Hopefully to become a much better investigator, in my opinion, than those who investigated his death. Judgmental. Ew. You just make things up like that? This is somebody's son. Having a 23-year-old son myself, I can't even imagine. I cannot even imagine. All of this, it seemed to many, was just the police not wanting to have to deal with the search because they had no leads and therefore no answers to give to the grieving family. As to why the owners and some staff of the bar he was last seen at were also making character assassination statements against Patrick, well, many chalk them up to just not wanting to be in the middle of a missing persons mystery on top of all of the other trouble that they were on a pretty regular basis. They all wanted to distance themselves from Patrick and his disappearance and eventual death. After all, Patrick McNeil's case had become one of the largest in the city's history at the time. All of this unproductiveness obviously wasn't getting anyone any closer to finding Patrick or figuring out what had happened to him once they finally did discover his body. Multiple false reports of a man matching his description being called in during the few months when everyone was actively searching for him wasn't helping matters either. Of course, none of those sightings had ever been substantiated, and most likely, now that we know where Patrick ended up, were not Patrick and had nothing at all to do with anything but wasting the police's time. Not that I blame people who were trying to help, thinking that they did genuinely see him. NYPD Detective Kevin Gannon stated about Patrick's death, quote, Patrick's death was not an accidental drowning. He was stalked, abducted, held for a period of time, murdered, and disposed of, end quote. Patrick McNeil, at least when speaking on the Smiley Face Killers, is often referred to as Victim Zero. One last thing about Patrick's autopsy, which really stumped and even angered a lot of people who were invested in the case emotionally and otherwise, and which was also very frustrating to them. They had a lot of frustration with the investigating authorities. The coroner actually wrote in the final report that Patrick's alcohol level was, quote, more than a little, but less than a lot, end quote. That was written. More than a little, but less than a lot. Are you kidding me? Once Gannon made this statement and started filling the police in on all of the strange circumstances surrounding this particular death, the police did reopen the case and tentatively started to consider it, quote, a potential abduction and murder pending further investigation by the police, end quote. Gannon had been reviewing the evidence photos of the body after it was uncovered from the water and had noticed that, quote, due to lack of skin slippage, end quote, it was highly unlikely Patrick had been in the water the entire couple of months he was missing, and it was more than likely he had only been in there a few days. This poses the obvious questions of where was he in all of that time? If he had only been in the water for a couple of days and he was missing for several months, where was he? Gannon and some other experts he had brought in to help him review the photos and information, which they thought were all very suspicious, were also calling attention to the fact that people who accidentally drown aren't found face up as Patrick was, and also they don't normally have ligature markings, specifically rope burns around their neck, like was the case with Patrick. There were also other markings that indicated some sort of strangulation and or hanging scenario had happened before he was put in the water by his murderer or murderers, according to Gannon's theory at least. Many people believe the most compelling evidence to back up the theory Patrick had in fact been held and then killed and put into the water are the findings of renowned medical/legal and forensic pathologist who became a consultant on many of these cases eventually, Dr. Cyril Wecht. Dr. Wecht is a badass. I love watching him. I love listening to him. Personally, I think he's the best of the best and he's amazing. Dr. Wecht is very well respected and regarded as top in his field. He said about Patrick's body, quote, I'm saying that the fly larva had been laid in the groin area. It was from an indoor fly. Could not have been from an outdoor fly. It was an indoor fly. And the larvae were there. Did not move ahead into the later stage. So we have a body that was already dead before it was placed in the water. I would call it a homicide. Yes. End quote. Gannon became the only friend in law enforcement to the family who believed with Gannon that Patrick had indeed been murdered. Kevin Gannon believed Patrick was slipped something, in his opinion, probably Rohypnol or GHB. both of which are extremely fast acting and both of which could cause the stumbling, confusion, and disorientation Patrick had been allegedly exhibiting once he left the bar that night. This is what witnesses who saw him had reported. These substances are also broken down very quickly and are basically untraceable in autopsy, mainly because even if they were in the system and hadn't been metabolized off yet, neither is automatically looked for in the usual autopsy. It has to be a specific request, and there really would be no reason for anyone to ask for someone to look for that in these particular cases. The tests for these two substances must be specifically made and wouldn't be for someone considered to have accidentally drowned due to intoxication. Another angle Kevin Gannon was looking to pursue was finding the owner and occupants of the vehicle multiple witnesses had reported was stalking and following Patrick from the second he walked out of that bar until the second he and the vehicle turned onto 90th Street. However, all of this speculation, as much sense as it made, was for nothing, because it has never been proven one way or another what actually happened to Patrick McNeil or why. 26 years later, and we still have no tangible proof he was abducted and killed. Despite all of this, police were convinced Patrick's death was the result of a series of unfortunate and random events that led the poor young man into the water that night. Case closed, that's it. It wasn't for lack of trying, though. For his part, I'd like to mention at least one more thing Detective Gannon had tried to do to help in the investigation, and that was requesting police do what is called a lawman's search to determine the rest of the characters on the partial plate they had been given of that suspicious vehicle. The police in charge of the case declined Gannon's request, however, as they said the $1,200 price tag was too much money, and also the time and effort it would take on their department, which was already stretched very thin to begin with, would be a waste. A waste. They actually said that. They refused to acknowledge any evidence to the contrary to their final statement and conclusion of the accidental drowning. This is not the only case where this has happened, and actually, if you dig deep enough in the 40-plus cases which have happened since Patrick's case in 1997, you will see that this becomes a very familiar and very unfortunate pattern. How are the police, media, and even the medical examiners involved so easily able to blow off such compelling and tangible evidence? Well, that's the question, though, isn't it? On April 16, 1997, the chief medical examiner for New York City, despite all of the evidence brought to him by Gannon himself, the experts he brought in, and even just the eyewitnesses as to Patrick's condition on the last night he was seen alive, concluded officially that Patrick had died of accidental drowning with cause of death still undetermined. Many involved have a very hard time understanding the statement, quote, cause of death drowning, cause of death undetermined, end quote, all in the same sentence. It's true, though, right? How can you list the cause of death as accidental drowning, but then list the cause of death as undetermined? Which is it? And it's just like, this just go, like, it's just gone. Nobody but his family is really paying attention to this. How is this just happening and just let go? It makes me very scared to live in this country, I'll tell you that. It's crazy. 24-year-old Navy veteran William Hurley was attending a Bruins hockey game in Boston, Massachusetts on October 8th, 2009. This case, for some reason, always really stuck out to me out of all of them for the smiley face killer theory and all of those investigations. I don't know why. This case is just super creepy to me and really gets my gears turning. William is yet another young man who suddenly and without any reasonable explanation became very dizzy, disoriented, and sick while simply sitting in his seat at the game. He was feeling so terrible, in fact, he called his fiancée, Claire Mahoney, to come and pick him up early. He had attended the hockey game with two friends and decided to leave early because of how terrible he was feeling, and he knew he had to work early in the morning anyway. William Hurley walked outside and was supposed to wait for Claire to arrive. When Claire arrived, however, William was nowhere in sight, despite them having agreed upon a specific meeting place where she had now arrived at. She decided to call him and ask him exactly where he was because she was right at the main entrance and couldn't have been very far from him. He couldn't have gotten far. She was close by when he initially called, and it didn't take her long to originally get there. This was strange in and of itself, how quickly she had gotten there and his not being there. According to Claire, when he answered the phone, she heard him ask someone where he was located, and she heard an unknown male voice respond, quote, 99 Nashua Street, end quote, which William then repeated to her. He also informed her his phone was just about to die, so she may not be able to call him back. Neither of them seemed very worried about that fact because she was literally just seconds away from the address he had just given her. When Claire pulled up in front of the Nashua Street address, however, William was once again not there and he was nowhere in sight. She attempted to call him again, but his cell must have died after all because the call went straight to voicemail without even ringing. Claire says she drove around and around all throughout the stadium, Nashua Street, and the surrounding area for an entire hour before leaving and returning home. She figured there was a miscommunication somehow, or because his phone died, William wasn't able to let her know he had gotten another ride. She assumed when she got home he would be there. He wasn't. Claire immediately reported William as missing, and several searches were conducted in the following days. 6 days after he disappeared, however, William's body was found in the Charles River, almost exactly even in the water with the spot he had originally asked her to pick him up from. Why wasn't he there when she got there, though? This was not 99 Nashua. This was right in the front gate where they were initially supposed to meet up. Who was the unknown man who gave William what most people think was the wrong location address? How did he get far enough away from Claire that she didn't find any trace of him when she only had to make a quick right-hand turn from where she was when she was on the phone with him the second time to the address he gave her of Nashua Street? According to the official autopsy, William's death was ruled an undetermined drowning. Investigators stated there were no signs of foul play. Another accidental accident, I guess. However, William's mother wasn't satisfied with the investigation or lack thereof or the coroner's findings, so she obtained a copy of the report and gave it to an outside physician to examine. What this expert found is shocking, considering what the official reports all stated. The expert stated that William had suffered, quote, blunt force trauma to the head, behind his eye socket, and on his left leg, end quote. So essentially, William was severely beaten before entering the water. Additionally, when William's cell phone was found, it was smashed to bits and nowhere near either the main entrance or Nashua Street, both of the places he had asked Claire to come get him from. Many people wonder why there was no further search into who the mysterious man was, why William's phone was smashed, or why he kept giving the wrong addresses. No testing for GHB was done, and he hardly had any alcohol at all in his system. What made William initially so sick, disoriented, and confused that he decided to leave the game early in the first place? No one knows. They're all valid questions, all still without answers. A smiley face was found painted somewhere near the river. Though the number of alleged victims of this alleged killer is officially in most reports listed as 40, that's only between 1997 and 2010. There have been even more recent cases, and some say the number is as high as 100 or even more. For some, this widely unaccepted theory only took place between the above-mentioned 23 years. However, if we look beyond that year, beyond the year 2010, we will find many strange and suspicious deaths which meet all of the criteria for the theory that Detective Gannon came out of retirement in order to investigate. Imagine if there really is a group of killers out there going around and abducting our nation's young, fit, and intelligent young men. All of the victims were exceptional in some way or another. How can this possibly be a coincidence? How can it be? Though the victims of these alleged serial killers are almost exclusively Caucasian, there are certain exceptions. Let's take another look at the initial case we discussed last week, that of Jelani Brinson, because it seems to fit in, and I have uncovered a tiny bit of updated information about this particular case. This is a particular exception, and it's almost more bizarre and tragic than any of the others we've discussed so far. Because of his race, he's African American, many people are even more baffled by Jelani's death. Even some of those who believe in the smiley face killer theory wholeheartedly have a hard time deciding if they believe his case is connected. In the book, Case Studies in Drowning Forensics, the authors list Jelani as a victim of the theorized killers. On April 17, 2009, Jelani and a co-worker from his job at Sprint in Brooklyn Park drove to another friend and co-worker's house in Anoka after work. The very next day, when he failed to return home, his mother reported Jelani as missing. I went through the entire thing last week. This is a summarization. A search was conducted of the immediate area of the friend's house in Anoka on Kennedy Street, where he was last seen. The night of the search, his stocking cap and one shoe was found in a neighbor's yard. That Sunday, which was 2 days after he had last been seen and the day after his shoe and cap were found, his other shoe was located outside of a nearby business. About a week later, at the Greenhaven Golf Course in Anoka, Jelani's body was found in that pond. This golf course was a very short distance from Jelani's friend's house where he was last seen alive. The official autopsy stated Jelani was placed in the water anywhere from 12 to 20 hours after he died. So again, this begs the question, where was he for the rest of that time? Investigators spoke with the last 3 men to have been with Jelani, and while they initially cooperated, like I reported last week, everyone cooperated, they all gave conflicting statements, and some are no longer cooperating with authorities. All 3 men did state, however, that Jelani was only in the home for less than 5 minutes when all of a sudden he got up and took off running out of the residence into the dark night. They claimed this was the last time anyone had ever seen him alive. Brinson had a daughter at the time, and while he didn't know it, he was about to be a father again to a son who would be named after him. Many people speculate that because there are persons of interest in this case, being the last 3 men known to have been with him, that this can't possibly be the case of the smiley face killers. Some, on the other hand, beg to differ. Nobody knows if this theory about the group of killers is real, let alone who's involved. What if one or possibly all of the men he was last seen with are involved somehow in the killings of all or most of the young men? So what is the theory on how these killers operate? It differs depending on who you ask. The theory most widely speculated about is the dark web theory. This theory goes that there is a group of people all throughout the United States and possibly other countries as well, think England's so-called canal pusher, that they're somehow operating deep in the dark web. They're so tech savvy and careful that whatever their communication is completely undetectable. This is all, of course, speculation and just a general overview of a much larger theory. In case studies of drowning forensics, the authors go on to theorize that not only is this a group of very meticulous and well-coordinated killers pulling off extremely efficient murders across the Midwest and Northeast, but that actually more than 1,000 people may be participating in one way or another in the crimes, all in indirect communication with one another somehow. The dark web is a strong possibility. These people are believed to be broken down into smaller subgroups, or cells, if you will, of 12 to 15 across multiple cities. While this may seem far-fetched to some, to others it's as horrifying as it is fascinating, as terrifying as it is interesting. I ask you again, could a group of human beings really be this organized and adept to be able to kill possibly 100 or more physically fit and above average intelligence young men and do it with 100% efficiency and accuracy as to not leave any trace of themselves or their organization behind in the days of touch DNA? To be able to do this for more than 30 years now. Many believe it's not only possible, but it's highly likely. When we as a society think of a murder, we usually think perhaps of crimes of passion. While most of us would never go so far as to commit a murder under any circumstances, at least a crime of rage or jealousy is a little bit more understandable. Serial killers are still incomprehensible, if not captivating. There are those who point to such things as the smiley faces being found near the bodies, all being of a different type and size, color, etc. Also, the date to which many of them were put near the bodies have never been able to conclusively be determined. So, like I said last week, being born in the 80s and growing up in the 90s where smiley faces were drawn, painted, I've put them all over the place, like literally everywhere. How would you know if the smiley is connected to the case? I mean, some of them were very worn. This means that a smiley face, which by the way is possibly the most popular graffiti symbol in the United States and has been since the hippies of the 60s, could have been there for years before the body was put or at least found in these nearby water sources. Maybe they are even in some cases put there after. Someone trying to fuel the theory maybe. Like there was no smiley face there and then someone noticed that a young man had been found and knowing about the smiley face killer theory went and put it there. I mean, that's just as likely. We just don't know. Could that be the case? Could the smiley face killers theory have actually created the smiley face killers in the first place? Could this, as some people speculate, have in fact put the idea to organize and kill in a group of messed up individuals' heads? Think about it though. Why else would the victimology suddenly change? At first and for decades, the victims were always Caucasians, no exceptions. Now we are seeing all different races and even a handful of openly gay victims for the first time. Is one theory begetting another theory? Maybe someday we'll know the answers, but probably not if there are no investigators willing to do the work it's going to take to catch these possible maniacs. Is there such a focus on debunking the smiley face aspect that people in charge are ignoring practically smoking gun evidence? Simply because they don't want to give attention to the graffiti, are these investigators not doing their jobs when everything about these cases is all wrong? The similarities in all of these cases goes well beyond being a mere coincidence. It couldn't get more cookie cutter. It's almost embarrassing, I mean, at least to some people, how obvious it is that there are serial murders taking place when the police just smile in the face of families and feign ignorance. With all of this being said, let's take one more look, guys. A look at what many believe to be a possible survivor of the smiley face killers. On January 8th, 2006, at around 7 o'clock in the morning, a 21-year-old named Cullen Fortney walked into a hospital emergency room in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Cullen was disheveled, soaking wet, and his shoes were caked with mud. The young man seemed to be a bit confused and exhausted, but for the most part, he had his wits about him. He was wearing no coat and no shoes. On a January morning in Wisconsin, that's freezing cold weather for him to be in that state of undress. According to the hospital staff, he had stated he had fallen into the river somehow, but couldn't remember where, when, or even how it had happened. Cullen was a student at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. The night before, he and a few friends had taken a cab to some bars to have a night out drinking and having some fun. Some speculate the bar they spent the most time at is a bar where another theorized victim of the smiley face killer went missing from, but it hasn't been confirmed. Therefore, I don't know what the name of the bar was. Cullen later told police that he left the bars at around 1:45 a.m. when he somehow became separated from two of the friends he was supposed to be leaving with, Jay Larson and Jay Hoffland. He says he can't remember anything after walking out of the bar and realizing he just wasn't with his friends anymore. The next thing he knew, he was traveling rapidly downstream and fighting an extremely rough current in the nearby river. After what felt like an eternity, but he estimated was actually about 15 minutes, Cullen stated he was somehow able to gather the strength to grab onto some kind of concrete structure and pull himself out of the river. He said he remembers nothing after this again until he woke up sometime later near the hospital he eventually checked himself into. He claims that he lost his hat, coat, shoes, cell phone, and $20 cash. Somehow he still had his wallet, though. The doctors were able to figure out what Cullen's blood alcohol level was at the time he left the bar somehow by checking what it was at 9 o'clock that same morning, a few hours after he had initially entered the hospital and started telling his bizarre story. They determined his blood alcohol content would have been 0.0163 at the time he left the bar at 1:45 a.m. The police were eventually able to recover some of the items Cullen stated he lost when they searched the river. The family believes in the investigators wholeheartedly when they say no foul play was involved and that Cullen simply had a misadventure while drunk. Had the 32-degree water had gotten him all the way under, this story may have had a more tragic ending, though. Cullen's family said that they feel the police, quote, did an outstanding job, end quote, in investigating what happened to him. However, there was a very odd twist in this case. The police pass it off as a series of coincidences, but some aren't so sure. Allegedly, one of the young men who had been at the bar with Cullen that night also ended up at the same hospital, unconscious and not remembering how he had gotten there or anything before leaving the bar that night after being separated from Cullen. Also, there is a very confusing and vague reference to a stolen truck on CCTV, which, just to sum it up, alleges that someone stole a van and indeed was caught trying to kidnap either Cullen or his friend. Many believe this person was one of the smiley face killers. I highly encourage you all to do your own research so as to be able to make informed decisions about coming to your own conclusions about the cases mentioned above and the many, many more out there with the exact same circumstances and alleged set of mere coincidences. While we have investigated and talked at length about the deaths allegedly caused by the smiley face killers and one possible survivor of the mob of fiends, there is yet another element to all of this, and that's those that are never found. There are quite a few cases where a young man who fits the profile of the smiley face killer victim goes missing, never to be seen or heard from again. One such case is the case of Nathan Andrew Edberg. On the night of April 14th, 1999, Nathan was last seen leaving Decoy's Bar and Grill on 4th Street in White Bear Lake, Minnesota. Nobody there that night could remember the last time they had seen him or what time he had left. Shortly after he was last seen, and the exact date and time are unknown, Nathan's pickup truck was found in a ditch. There was no sign of him at the scene where the truck was found, and according to investigators, there was no sign of foul play either. Of course there wasn't, because is there ever? What do they consider signs of foul play? I would just love to know what their wavelength is for determining if there was foul play or not. What they did come across, though, were a few footprints heading east away from the accident site. Authorities said it appeared as though Nathan missed the turn onto the highway and ended up in the ditch. He has never been seen or heard from again. The bartender at Decoys told authorities Nathan was a regular customer in the place and most of the staff knew who he was. He stated Nathan had arrived that night at around 7:30 p.m. and ordered a beer. The bartender claimed that Edberg was, quote, much happier than he had been, end quote, on his previous visits to the establishment. This was considered relevant because, according to those closest to him, Nathan was dealing with some serious depression in April of 1999 due to a bunch of different things going on in his life. His parents were divorcing. He had lost both his job and longtime girlfriend, and he was living with his cousin because he couldn't afford his own place. His parents hadn't even really thought to report him as missing until they somehow received news that the truck had been impounded for several days. When they hadn't heard from him, they just assumed he needed some space to work through his issues, and he would come back around when he was ready. They were trying to give him space, knowing what he was going through. His case remains unsolved to this day, and while police are still actively looking for him, he's only considered a missing person at this point. The police insist there was no evidence of foul play at the crash site. Many people speculate, though, that this may very well have been a case of the smiley face killer. The close proximity from where he was last seen, where his pickup truck was found, to the water strikes them as suspicious at the very least. Also, the direction the footprints were headed, leading away from the crash area, were headed in the direction of the nearby water source as well. Could the police just innocently not be putting all of this together, or are they purposely downplaying one of the few cases of the smiley face killer that they can due to the lack of a body? Nathan's father unfortunately passed away in 2001, but his mother is still looking for answers and praying to see her son again one day. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, if you enjoyed hanging out with me, if you enjoyed hanging out with each other in the premiere. Subscribe if you haven't already, and spread the love by sharing this video. Gemma Jade merch is now available at www.jivecreations.com. Shop Gemma Jade merch. Please go on in. The first 15 people to send me photos of merch you bought or wearing a t-shirt or something like that, I'm going to send you an awesome gift or give you a free reading or something cool. So let me know what y'all buy and let me know how you love it. It's done by Arisha Haynes, Lotus Girl Towing to Neil's twin sister, and those ladies are just fantastic. They're gemstones just like you guys, so we definitely can trust them, and I just appreciate all of their hard work. JiveCreations.com for Gemma Jade merch. In the description box, you will find ways to donate to the channel, my PayPal, my Cash App, and my Amazon wish list gift link if you would like to send me a gift. Remember, donations go to the channel. They go to Dex. They go to StreamYard. They go to so many things that I don't think you guys even realize, like backgrounds and all sorts of things like that. And I just really appreciate those of you who donate your time, donate your energy, your efforts, and your money when you have it, because it is also how I get paid. On Wednesday nights, right here on this channel, you will find myself and Ghost Dragon ZW starting around 7:15 p.m. Eastern Time and ending at 11 p.m. Eastern Time, or when we run out of people to read for live intuitive oracle. So come on in and check that out. It is the best chat on YouTube, hands down, if I do say so myself. On Thursday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, you will have either Chillax and Chat with myself, Ghost Dragon ZW, and Miss Lara, or Conversations with Lara, the Paranormal Pixie Hour. Usually on Friday and Saturday nights, Ghost Dragon ZW goes live at midnight for Midnight Vibes, Conversations with the Ghost Dragon. So if you're a late nighter and you're up at that time, go on in and check that out. Monday afternoons every other week. So not the week you will be watching this video, but the following week. And I usually do remind you guys in the videos if I remember. It's Afternoon Talk with myself and Ghost Dragon ZW starting at 12 noon Eastern Time. For those of y'all who are in a different time zone and perhaps aren't up when it's 7 p.m. Eastern, it could be 3 o'clock where you are in the morning. I don't know. Come on in and hang out with us. I'm trying to get some guests on there as well. Links for the Kindle and paperback versions of my book also in the description box. Magazines from the Paranormal Press. Hit me up if you want autographed copies of any of that stuff, or for any other correspondence, to order a personal reading, to order a manifestation intention spray, crystal packets, video chats, spiritual sessions. I do a lot, guys, that I don't think a lot of you are aware of. So if you need any help with any of that, GemmaJadeParanormal at gmail.com. Also, again, send me pictures of the merch that you pick up at JiveCreations.com, and I will definitely send you something awesome or do something nice for you, like give you free readings and stuff. That's about it. I don't think I want to go on a long ramble. I'm pretty tired. I've been filming for a long time trying to get this one out there, so I really hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you so much for all of your support. Be kind to yourself, guys. Be kind to each other. It doesn't cost anything, and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. If nobody told you today, you're amazing, you're capable, you're smart, you are just the way you were meant to be, you are on the right path, you are a spiritual being having a human experience, and blessing and abundance are your birthright as a human. If you want to talk about anything like that, I am always here for you guys. If you want to maybe try to discover your purpose or talk about attachments and things like that, whatever the case may be, I'm always here. But I believe in you. If nobody tells you that, if nobody told you that today, you are amazing. And I definitely believe in you. Make your dreams come true. Because if you knew where I was 5 and 6 years ago, I don't even know if most of you would believe it if you don't already know me. So I know that people can change. I know that you can change your circumstances. And I know that you can make even the most far-fetched and far-reaching dreams come true. Always go in grace, smile at a stranger, and I'll see you guys next time.